The Cold War didn't start in 1947. It didn't start with Berlin. Its roots go back to before World War II had even ended. In the opulent halls of a Black Sea resort in February 1945, this was Yalta, where Franklin D. Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin convened to plan the final months of the war and the shape of the post-war world. The Yalta Conference is often remembered as a meeting of allies united against a common enemy, Nazi Germany. But beneath the surface, it was a tense negotiation of competing ambitions and conflicting visions for Europe. By early 1945, the Soviet Union had borne the brunt of the war against Germany. Over 20 million Soviets had died, their cities and economy devastated. Stalin entered Yalta determined to secure the USSR's western borders and ensure that the horrors of the past would never be repeated. His demand for a buffer of friendly governments across Eastern Europe was not just ideological, it was rooted in survival. Churchill, seasoned by decades of geopolitics and a deep understanding of Russian ambitions, sought to protect British influence in Europe and maintain open trade routes. He understood that Soviet domination of Eastern Europe could threaten the post-war balance of power. Roosevelt, in declining health and determined to secure lasting peace, aimed to maintain the Grand Alliance while establishing institutions to prevent future wars. His vision of the United Nations was central to this, but he also hoped to maintain good relations with Stalin. Fearing that a hardline approach could fracture the alliance before Germany's defeat, one of the most critical agreements at Yalta concerned Germany itself. The three leaders decided to divide Germany into occupation zones: American, British, and Soviet. Berlin, the capital, would be similarly divided. The goal was to administer Germany carefully, prevent the resurgence of Nazism, and eventually rebuild the country. But the plan also revealed a fundamental tension. While the Western Allies hoped for a democratic, economically stable Germany, Stalin sought to weaken Germany and maintain strict control to prevent future invasions of Soviet territory. Eastern Europe proved far more contentious. Stalin promised that liberated nations would have free elections. This included Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and Hungary, countries the Soviets had liberated from Nazi occupation, but which would now be in the Soviet sphere. The West interpreted this promise as a commitment to democracy. Stalin, however, viewed it pragmatically. Elections were acceptable only if they led to governments friendly to the USSR. Historian John Lewis Gaddis notes that Yalta was not a betrayal, but a pragmatic accommodation between powers with incompatible goals. Yet many in the West, particularly Churchill, saw it as a missed opportunity to secure a democratic Eastern Europe. Poland illustrates the betrayal vividly. A government in exile had operated in London during the war, yet the Soviets installed a communist regime loyal to Moscow, marginalizing the London-based leadership. Across Eastern Europe, similar patterns emerged: Soviet-backed governments, purges of political opposition, and a rapid consolidation of communist power. The ideological conflict was now unavoidable. The West advocated democracy, capitalism, and integration into international institutions. The USSR demanded control, security, and expansion of communism. As historian Tony Jett explains, the seeds of the Cold War were planted at Yalta, not by deception alone, but by the inherent clash of visions for Europe's future. Another key issue at Yalta was the United Nations. Roosevelt pushed for its creation as a mechanism to prevent another global conflict. The Soviets agreed but demanded a permanent seat on the Security Council with veto power, ensuring that their strategic interests would always be protected. This arrangement would later play a crucial role in Cold War politics, allowing the USSR to block Western initiatives and maintain influence in global affairs. Beyond Europe, Yalta had global implications. Roosevelt wanted Soviet entry into the war against Japan, a critical factor in ending the Pacific War quickly. Stalin agreed, but only after Germany's defeat. In exchange, the Soviets secured territorial concessions in Asia, including influence over the Kuril Islands and southern Sakhalin. These arrangements would later contribute to post-war tensions in East Asia. The personal dynamics at Yalta were equally significant. Roosevelt, seriously ill and weakened by polio, sought a lasting legacy of peace. Churchill, always cautious and skeptical, aimed to limit Soviet expansion. Stalin, shrewd and ruthless, sought maximum advantage, blending diplomacy with coercion. These personalities shaped the conference as much as policy or ideology. When the war ended, the consequences of Yalta became stark. Eastern Europe became firmly communist. The promised democratic elections were ignored or manipulated. Trust between East and West collapsed. So-called Grand Alliance had achieved victory over Hitler. But it had also sown the seeds of a new, more dangerous conflict. Historian Melvin P. Leffler argues that Yalta demonstrates how diplomacy, even in victory, can produce conflict when interests are incompatible. The agreements reached were not inherently flawed, but they were contingent on cooperation that never fully existed. The consequences of Yalta rippled immediately. By 1947, with the Soviet consolidation of Eastern Europe, the West responded with initiatives like the Marshall Plan and the Truman Doctrine, formalizing the ideological, economic, and military divide that would dominate the Cold War. Germany's occupation zones became West and East Germany. Berlin, the divided city, became the iconic front line of the ideological struggle. In short, Yalta was not just a conference about the post-war world. It was the moment where wartime allies began to distrust each other. Promises of freedom clashed with the realities of power, and where the Cold War first took concrete form. Understanding Yalta explains why the Cold War began almost immediately after World War II, why Europe remained divided for decades, and why even victory in war cannot guarantee peace. As historian Mark Mazower observes, Yalta teaches us that human ambition, ideology, and fear are as powerful as armies, and often more consequential. Even today, the agreements made and broken at Yalta serve as a cautionary tale. Diplomacy is fragile, power is persistent, and the line between cooperation and conflict is perilously thin.